for now, I do want to start with River because that is actually the first thing of yours that I've ever seen. I was in film school a few years ago at UCLA. I remember seeing it back then, and I was just completely moved by it. And since then, I've been in touch with your work, and there's just this like delicate, personal, immersive, and sensory approach that you have with all your work that is just really, really amazing. So I'd love to hear from you about what the process was with River was like with getting started and having conversations with Miles about it.
Um, yeah, Miles, we were kind of together in LA. I was shooting a commercial for the company that he's with, Smuggler. Um, and he was in LA and he reached out to me and sent me the track. And Miles and I had worked together about 2 years prior. And uh, we hadn't worked together since. So when he reached out, it was kind of cool just to hear from him again. And we're both from the same area in Canada, Vancouver.
Okay.
And yeah, there was a lot of like difficulty with the shoot because I was on another production, so I couldn't scout. And Miles and his production designer Jade had gone around and scouted, and kind of in Long Beach area. And then we knew we were going to travel to Baltimore to shoot kind of the non-performance stuff. So I was kind of just like, improvising a lot. When I got out there to shoot in Long Beach, I think we wrapped the night before or the day before, and Miles's shoot was a night shoot, so I was pretty tired already, and I took some of the same crew with me from the job, like
Yeah.
my focus puller Jimmy Ward, and we were shooting on film on like a completely different package, and yeah, we just kind of blocked the seeds out and did it that way, did it like a really traditional way, even though I was pretty unprepared. I feel like when you kind of follow the formula of block, light, rehearse, and tweak, shoot, you can be actually really, really spontaneous. Because essentially what you're requesting from the director is for them to show you the scene and the
Right.
actors to show you the scene, and then you can respond to it, you know?
Yeah.
Whereas typically, sometimes when you get on a production, you're really obsessed with the shot list, and you don't block it. You just set up the first shot of the shot list, and then you start shooting the blocking, and you don't really get that chance to really understand what the emotion is or the themes are, or,
Right.
understand the space and explore the different possibilities in which it could be. So thankfully on River, I remember the performance stuff, just kind of walking into this hotel room, and we started shuffling a lot of the furniture around, and Miles had talked about doing like a long Steadicam shot from a corridor. So I had Dana Morris, my Steadicam operator, come out. He lives in Long Beach, so it was really convenient for him. And he came out and did a handful of shots for us, and then I took over and I started doing like handheld stuff near the end. And then we went to Baltimore, and that was like a whole different other story. Like, I've shot there in the past, and it's a really, really interesting place. Really, um, it's there's a lot of suffering going on there, and there's some really intimate stories. And I remember that there was one moment on set where, I was trying to get Miles to adopt this technique that I seen Khalil Joseph do a lot, probably pretty much entirely, where he doesn't really set up a scene. He just kind of like, um, well, he sets up a scene like it's an event, and you shoot it like a documentary. But I kind of shoot it like a photojournalist rather than a documentarian.
Right.
And so he had cast all these real activists who, um, uh, I guess it was a variety of different family members who had experienced some injustice from the police force there, and a young man's life was taken by a cop when he was unarmed. and we got those people to come in and kind of do their protest on a street corner, and we did it in this. It was actually a pretty dangerous area. It was probably one of the most drug trafficked neighborhoods in America, and we set up the scene there and we shot it. And then afterwards, we were supposed to shoot in this alleyway, kind of like a wide shot of mother and son kind of walking down a corridor. And this guy comes out on his porch, just like I see a silhouette, and he's like, "Get the fuck out of here." And I was like, "Oh God, okay, we don't have permission to be here, even though our scout said we did." And I start walking back, and I'm like, "Let's just shoot right next to the base camp." And it was really beautiful out. There's kind of like a mist along the ground, and I was talking to the Steadicam operator, and about like 50 feet behind me, a gunshot goes off, and the Steadicam guy starts running, and I just kind of took the first right I could, like around the corner, and I roll up on the location manager, and I'm like, "Dude, this is not safe. Like, we should leave right now."
Yeah.
And the producer comes over, and he's like, "I don't know. We should get out of here. Was that a gunshot? Was that a gunshot?" And the location guy's like, "Yeah, but he wasn't shooting at you." And I was like, "Oh, okay. Yeah, let's go."
So then how'd you move forward from there?
We went to a house that we had scouted. Like, it's kind of the end scene with the mother and daughter. We
Yeah.
scouted this house a bunch of times, and it was actually really. I had formed like a bit of a bond with the people in there just from hanging out, and they were really struggling. Like, one time we went in there, I think we scouted it like twice, and the second time we went in there, the oven was open, and I could smell like natural gas, so I closed it. And maybe like 5 minutes later, this lady came down who I hadn't seen before. I had interacted with a lot of people there, but there's this other, random person in there. And she opened the oven back up again and then walked away, and I realized they were using it to heat the house.
Oh wow.
Yeah. And then on the shoot, some of the crew members objected to being in there. They thought it was really dirty and filthy, and they didn't feel like it was safe. So I ended up pulling my own focus and operating. My wife, Jack, would take the camera from me when I didn't need it anymore. But I just kind of felt really connected to these people, and I didn't want to feel like I wanted to tell their story.
Yeah.
And I felt like walking away from their place would have been humiliating to
Right.
them. And we weren't exploiting them in any way. I didn't feel like our bonds were genuine, and we felt like what we were doing in Baltimore was telling their story, because we'd interacted with a couple different families and households and stuff like that, and we shot in other places, and it was kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
Um,
How did some of these interactions inform or influence some of the decisions you were making day to day on the shoot then?
Sorry, say that again.
I was just asking how some of these interactions you were having maybe informed how you move forward creatively, and just responding to what you were seeing around you.
Yeah, pretty strongly. I don't know. Honestly, I wasn't thinking too much about it. I was just kind of in the zone. I was responding to their places, being really empathetic to their needs, and
Right.
um, I can't really recall if there was any like shot or idea that I had in there. It was more their spaces kind of dictated everything, and I was
Right.
just in there responding to it. And I had just had a gaffer and a key grip. That was it. And I had like a lot of light panels. They're kind of pre-light light mats. Like, I used to just have polycarbonate with light ribbon
Yeah.
kind of taped onto the front of it. And I really liked that because we could just tape it to the ceiling or Um, some guys use like a painter's tape and then a layer of Velcro, and then you Velcro it to the ceilings, but you use the painter's tape so it doesn't damage the paint.
Yeah.
And we were just, putting stuff on the ceilings and hand holding lights, and stuff was on batteries, no Jenny really, nothing.
Yeah. Can you talk about some of the themes that you guys were discussing that you wanted to just keep in mind as you were just in this shoot and just responding to what was around you?
I don't know if I had any themes in mind, to be honest with you. It was actually almost entirely intuitive. If there's any themes that came out of the film, it came out because those themes kind of came out from within. It's
Right.
similar, actually very similar to how Khalil works too. He never comes up with an idea and imposes the idea on the video, I guess, or the whatever it is. It actually is like a reverse of that. Like the scouting process informs kind of all the decisions and the themes. As we're scouting, we're interacting with people, hearing stories, liaisoning with a local who's a cast member or another person. It was very similar to that, even though uh, Miles's kind of editing structure and his narrative storytelling is much tighter than Khalil's in that sense. Khalil's actually mostly metaphor and feeling. But uh, yeah, I think a lot of the responses that we had were coming out of that. And I was also requesting like a lot from Miles in a sense. Like I really wanted every shot to be special, and we'd get into scenarios where um, one of the cast members wasn't quite, um, she would look in the camera a lot, or it, we had this Steadicam shot where Miles wanted to like pull her, and I just knew the shot wouldn't work because it's actually kind of a difficult shot to do with a real person
Yeah.
because they're kind of pushing the Steadicam operator in their direction, and it's camera's right in their face, and I just knew it wouldn't work. Um, and Miles was like, "Yeah, but let's just shoot it." And I was like, "Okay, I'll do a rehearsal." And we did a rehearsal, and then I the rehearsal wasn't good, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm not going to shoot that." And then we would make pivots and kind of like go around. So I was kind of establishing like a really good collaboration with Miles too, to you know show that I cared and I wasn't just interested in doing whatever. Um, it had to be great. So that was one thing that I remember going on in my mind at the time too.
Yeah. Um, you mentioned some of the similarities in how you worked with Khalil and with Miles. I'm really curious. You've obviously worked with a lot of directors multiple times now between both of them and Gustav and Andrea. And
Yeah.
I'm just like I'm very curious about the journey for you to find these collaborators who you have this circle of people that really you connect with who see things the way you do. Um, how did you kind of reach that point of finding these people and what's that been like for you?
Oh, it took a long time. I mean, um, with Khalil, I saw his work a long time ago, and kind of way before we started working together. And then I started becoming friends with a group of guys named the Funk Brothers, um, who had produced some of the stuff that Khalil had done. And they also had an edit suite, and I started working with them. And then, kind of over the course of like a year and a half, uh, Khalil and I became connected. And then, almost a year after us connecting, we found something to work on together because Khalil had Khalil only does a few things every year, and but he gets a lot of requests and he gets really excited and enthusiastic about an idea, but then when it starts to kind of get closer to happening, either realize that he's not the right person for it, so he'll back out. So there was like a lot of that happening, like a lot of, oh yeah, we're gonna do it. It's gonna happen here, and then it wouldn't happen, and you just wouldn't hear from
Yeah.
him. With Miles, it kind of came out of like uh, mutual respect for each other. With Gustav, it was kind of more uh, commercials, and I think Gustav had always worked with his brother. He still works with his brother a lot, primarily. So I'm just kind of like filling in when his brother's not available.
Yeah.
And I love Gustav. So I'm always really excited whenever I get to work with him. I recently worked with Andrew Dominic, and that came through Khalil. Just,
Yeah.
Khalil and Andrew are, I guess, both sort of former apprentices of Terrence Malick,
Okay.
and I think Khalil wanted to screen a film that Andrew directed at the Underground Museum, and then Andrew wanted Khalil to direct a movie he'd written, and none of that stuff ended up really happening. But then Andrew and I met. It's very strange. I feel like you kind of become a magnet for each other.
Yeah.
One of the things that I really learned early on when I did this movie, Days, the director was a fanatic about artistic integrity, and I kind of took that uh, approach as well. And now looking back on it, I feel like people who have a lot of integrity, kind of artistic integrity specifically, they gravitate towards each other because they recognize it in the images and
Yeah.
the sound and the whatever it is,
Right.
the storytelling. So, that it just kind of sort of happens, uh,
Right.
you know.
That's kind of the dream and the goal for like for DPs is to find a director who and I guess like a group of directors that you can identify with and share that vision with. I'm curious what it was like before that for you. How did you get into film or into filmmaking, cinematography, creating anything, and to now to where you are now?
Um, well, I had an interest at a really young age. My parents, well, my dad's a teacher, my mom's a singer, but my mom's brother, my uncle, is also a musician, and he is a huge cinephile and had aspirations of becoming an editor. And I think he moved to LA when he was younger and studied to become an editor, but ended up becoming a drummer and stayed as a drummer and a singer for his career. Um, but he had always had a camera around, and whenever we'd go stay with him in the summer, he would just like play lots of movies because there was nothing really else to do. He
Yeah.
was in like a bit of a small town, and none of our friends were around, so me and my brother would just watch movies with our uncle. And he had like a real literacy for good filmmaking. Um, so kind of around the age 16, uh, I had the opportunity of like doing some work program in my high school, and that took me on set for the first time because my mom was teaching um, a daughter of a prominent producer and production designer in the local film community in Vancouver. So I went out on set, and man, it was such a special experience. But I remember being like, um, really kind of scared and nervous. And I was 16 and I'd never been up that early in my life. It was cool, but that really sparked my interest. And then I took a film program in my high school, and I went into film school. And I failed film school, which was, whatever. Um,
What happened there?
I didn't show up to any of my exams.
Okay.
Yeah. But it was kind of like I already had a mentor in the industry, and I'd worked on sets as like a paint laborer, and in the art department and stuff like that. So I kind of, and there's in Vancouver, there's like, half the Teamsters are ex-convicts. So I was like, you don't need like, that kind of, you need more of a connection into the business than you do like a resume or a reel.
Right.
So I felt like I had that with my mentor. Though I didn't really exploit it after film school, I went and worked at a grip and lighting rental house, um, repairing lights. I was recruited by a guy there to do all the lighting maintenance. And then at some point, there was just like a massive influx of productions into Vancouver, and the union had no more bodies to put on sets. So they were reaching out to the rental facilities for crew. And I started working on, you know, IATSE productions at that point as a lamp operator.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Your work is obviously, as I mentioned before, it's so lyrical in how you approach things. I want to know, like, I'm just curious about your transition or journey from, as you said, from film school to a grip house and now to this kind of work, this approach. Um, where did you kind of develop this approach?
I think one kind of essential moment was I had done my first film. It was this movie called Switch. It was a complete failure. It never came out. Um, but we shot it over 2 years. The first year, their financing ran out, and they just kind of stopped the movie. And then the second year, they got the money back, and they started shooting again. And there was like a 3 month window in which we were supposed to shoot, but the schedule kept pushing, and all I did was binge watch movies. I watched 3 movies a day for
Wow.
like months, and I would watch 3 movies, and then I would read about the films and how they were done, and I would focus on a particular cinematographer, and then watch all their work, and then read about all, ASC mag and all that stuff, like all the literature available,
Right.
um, and really kind of taught myself cinematography at that point. And then who I am now is kind of like more just a combination of like the directors I've worked with and the situations they've put me into and how I've responded to it instinctually and through my experiences as a human being. And, you know, it kind of just, I didn't have any control over it at one point. It was just all just happening the way it is. Things happen. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah.
You've obviously worked a lot with Khalil Joseph. You mentioned that he doesn't have perhaps a structured approach. You said the locations and the tech scouts kind of inform the process. Um, if you could maybe talk about one of the pieces you've done with him, process by Sampha, for example, and how you guys developed the language for that piece.
Yeah, it's funny. I think because Lemonade was such a nightmare for him, he had changed a little bit at that point because there wasn't much trust from, Beyonce and her team for what he was doing. There's a lot of doubt going into it, I think, because Khalil had maybe a reputation or whatever. And then on Sampha, I get a treatment for it, right? And I look through the treatment, and there's like this scene with a lion that's like roaring at the camera, and the same GM logo comes up. We're like, it's kind of an absurd idea, and I couldn't see how Khalil would do that. And we were on the flight to Sierra Leone, and I finally brought it up, and we'd already shot like 2 days. I was like, "So how are we going to do this scene with the lion?" And he looked at me like he didn't know what I was talking about. And then I was like, in the treatment, the lion thing, and he was like, "Oh, no, no, no! I just put that in there so I could get the money." So, so his whole approach had changed now. Instead of like not saying anything, he just made up some BS to get what felt like he needed, and then he was just doing what he does. So he's kind of learning, and he was changing his approach a little bit. But it's always, in Sierra Leone, it was the same thing. It was like they just hired a a local music festival um, guy. Like he threw the music festival in Sierra Leone, a British dude. So he was kind of our production manager, producer locally because he could get, support where we needed it from the locals. But we kind of just drove around and we would see things and take photos and we'd look at a few locations based off some requests that were very vague. And um, yeah, it was a tough shoot because everyone was on those like Malarone, I think it's called. It's like the malaria medicine. So I was having like really crazy nightmares every night. It was like stuff like my mother being killed and shit like that. And
Wow.
everybody's having those nightmares too, and the crew's just kind of stressed out. And at some point, I think they just stopped the shoot and let everyone have like a day off just because of that.
Okay.
Um, yeah, but it was really really enjoyable, but also really tough because of like how you felt. It's just such an alien place. But by the end of it, it was just like so much fun, so much fun. But yeah, completely improvised. Nothing was really planned. Khalil doesn't tell me necessarily what he's planning either. Um, he'll have a conversation with the production designer, and then they won't tell me because I'm shooting stuff. Like, and Khalil's not always next to the camera. Like sometimes a lot of the time he's like off doing something else, like prepping something else. And he'll just have set it up like an event and it's happening already. He doesn't control it anymore. So
Yeah.
he just lets it happen. Um,
Can you talk about how
yeah,
that might be liberating for you, or allows you to dig into something that's more personal?
for sure. For sure. I think it's really, really tough because, and the first couple times it happened to me, it was really kind of shocking because usually you have a director's sentiment to lean on and to know that you've done or are doing something good or if that's in the right direction that he's intending. Khalil doesn't give you anything like that. So you have to almost rely totally on yourself. And it makes you really vulnerable because you don't know if what you're doing is right or wrong or whatever. So
Yeah.
you kind of just have to like trust yourself and trust your instincts or just kind of just not even think about it, just keep pushing, constantly moving forward. That's what it's like for me. I kind of just I don't think about much, and sometimes, I'll have my focus puller shoot a shot, and I'll have the stills photographer do a shot, and I'll have it's like really free and open, and uh, I think even on Sampha, uh, Rachel, my focus puller, did like all the water stuff. That wasn't even planned, and I was shooting other stuff with, our second AC pulling focus on the beaches, and we're just kind of all divided working together.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
What's the
Um,
size of your crew on something like this?
it's still small. It's
Yeah.
really small. Um, you know, it's I have a lot of empathy for the camera department on those shoots because it's super super difficult. You know, um, they get so much pressure. I think we had like three cameras. We had a Aircam LT, a black and white Alexa, and an Alexa Mini,
Wow.
and one camera crew.
Oh, wow.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Like
it's crazy.
it's super super difficult for them, and they're not really getting much support from anyone else because nobody really knows the gear. So it's really really hard. Um, and then when you're in like an alien territory, I mean on Sampha, we, Khalil had wanted to do that all on black and white. And I was like, yeah, let me just bring my camera and we'll bring like, 10 rolls of stock or whatever. And I had suggested doing some stuff that was just like interludes that had color or just focusing on color composition or responding to whatever we saw there. Who knows? We might be
Yeah.
really inspired. And I think in the first day, Khalil was like, oh, I see this all in color. So we were flying in like the drone people brought film, the choreographer brought film. Like we were trying to bring in more film because we didn't bring any with us. It was kind of
Yeah.
like just this last minute decision. Um, so, it's pretty challenging. But, those requests you get really inspired by, and you can, they're challenges. It's really challenging. But that's the thing that kind of allows you to, you know, trigger that response. It's
Right.
like you become way more determined. Um, and that's kind of like maybe mostly what the aesthetic is that determination. It's it's not even thought out, you know. It's
Yeah.
just pure response. And you're there and you know that you want to do something really good. So you you're just adrenaline's just going through the roof. So
Yeah.
you push really hard.
Can you talk about how that process maybe informs the work you do on more structured type of projects, like a feature or something with not with Khalil or Miles?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of what I was talking about initially when I was saying like block, light, rehearse, tweak, shoot. I mean, I have two different ways of working, and I think for some reason they have the same feeling. Like when I work with Khalil, there's no blocking, there's no anything. He just sets up an event, and that's what I start documenting or shooting
Yeah.
or photographing or whatever. Um, but I'm using my intuition and I'm responding to something that I'm seeing. Do you understand? Whereas when you block a scene, it's kind of the same thing, but you just have a little bit more choice, or you can dictate, or maybe the actors need something from the cinematographer and director, like a direction, like
Yeah.
you're just kind of fulfilling different requests. So when I work on a film, it can be one or the other. Like you can decide if you're going to do a sequence in the event way. Like on my last film, we did some scenes like that. But then other times we would block it out, and uh, I would see the rehearsal and I would lay marks on the ground pretty much everywhere. All the camera positions would be marked out on the ground, and then I would light it, and I would spend however long it takes to light it, and then shoot. And to be honest with you, in the perfect world, I'd almost I would desire to spend half the time blocking and half the time shooting, you know? And I always feel like when I've done my best stuff shooting, it happens like this. Like everyone's in the pocket, the actors are just doing it. You're moving really quickly, you've got it all marked out on the ground, you've lit it already, and you're just like jumping around and getting the shots really quickly.
Yeah.
And you spend like half the day blocking and lighting, and then the other half of the day shooting. That's the most enjoyable kind of way to work for me, and it yields the best results so far in the stuff I've done.
Gotcha. I want to talk about Medeus real quick because I mean that film was insanely beautiful, and it's the crux of it seems to be about the disconnect of every character, and you just with the composition work and the stillness of the camera. Talk about how the language of those two things was a part of that disconnectivity.
Yeah, I think it was very similar to what I just said. I remember Andrea and I didn't really have time to shot list the movie for some reason. I can't remember why. We scouted everything for a really long time. I remember I'd broken my ankle on a job kind of like 3 or 4 months prior to it too. So I was kind of immobile, and I just healed as the movie started. I think they actually moved the schedule to accommodate my ankle. Um, so when I got into it, I had this like a lot of pent up energy. And when we'd get on the set, we would just kind of start figuring it out. And I don't know where those compositions came from. It was just, oh, you know where it came from, to be honest with you, for sure. It came from this idea. we had a concept, and I still use this concept. It's a deeply philosophical belief in what storytelling is, that you conceal the story, you conceal the the particular information that's important to the plot through the camera language. And what it does is it creates an eroticism. So the spectators trying to kind of tear off the veil that you're putting over the image, and it becomes much more mysterious. And there's a lot more tension to the framing and the images and how they're interpreted, and the framing and how I constructed those frames were kind of all about how do I conceal what's happening here?
Right.
How do I conceal the emotions? How do I but those ideas only came out of a response to the blocking and seeing kind of what the young actors were doing, and Catalina and Brian and all those amazing actors. Um, and it's also a minimalist approach. Like, we were trying to be very simplistic. I mean, the script was only 60 pages. It was very simple. It wasn't like a film with a lot of plot points or anything like that. So
Yeah.
it became more about the tension and the sensorial experience of being in that environment with those people.
Right.
Alienation was probably one of the biggest themes, and harnessing that and trying to create frames that articulated that, but also concealed it at the same time. It's really interesting. Like, you're almost entirely rather than, a lot of filmmaking is based off of like a predisposed idea that the camera and the idea should be connected to a character. And rather than doing that and expressing that through point of view and other things that a lot of Western filmmakers do, and Eastern, all filmmakers do that, we were attempting to say those same things with color, with composition, with mise en scene. Like, how do we articulate that character's inner experience through texture and through the color of a wall, or the window being open, or just other ways, other metaphors to do it rather than representing point of view. So it becomes actually a much more impressionistic way of working. Um, I think so. I think it's more impressionistic.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think every element in there it's speaking about so many things deeper than what it is that it appears to be. Your use of mirrors and doorways and windows, like you said, the landscapes as well, the locations seem to be a character in a lot of ways. If you can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the humanity behind any story is immediately reflected in the habitat of the characters. Uh, and that goes on. I mean, that's so apparent to me in any human interaction. You can really sense where they come from, you know, through meeting and connecting with somebody and their story. And there's always universal themes inside that. But for me, in a cinematic form, it's important for me to represent the habitat as much as the character. And in that film, it offered that because there
Right.
was landscapes. But also in doing that, we can see it. Like, if you notice in the film, we never actually see the house that all these characters live in from the
Yeah, it's true.
outside. We only see it from the inside out. And that was a choice because we never really wanted to. We never made that like kind of really romantic image of the house on the hill. We did it in reverse. We only saw it through the doorways and the windows looking back out into the environment. Um, and I thought it was beautiful, that choice. There's something a little too conventional about establishing shots. I haven't quite figured out my connection to them. I'm almost like more interested in concealing it and not allowing the spectator to know exactly where they are, but give
Right.
them kind of the essence of this thing that's maybe a little bit further back, you know. It's an interesting effect. I don't really know the result of it, but that's also part of my process as a cinematographer. I'm much more interested in the questions than I am the answers. And whenever I've come up with a concept and tried to impose or show the answer to my concept to the spectator, it's always come off really contrived and didn't really connect. It's always much more interesting to me to that's the give that responsibility to the spectator of sorts, you know. It's like it's their job to construct that. And I've actually talked about that in some other interviews where I was really into listening to like lectures about Friedrich Nietzsche's writings, and he had this concept called the natural attitude. I can't remember where I read it or listened to it, but the idea is that when you're walking down like a sidewalk, you walk past a tree. In reality, you don't actually see the tree in its entirety. You don't see all the bark. You don't see all the branches. You don't see all the leaves. It's
Right.
actually much too complex for the human brain to construct that or to understand it all. So what it does is it constructs an approximation of it. And I feel like the same thing happens in cinematography and in the cinema. Like, as you can see in Medea's or Hannah or even in Khalil's work, I'll crop people's heads off, or I'll frame them in a way. I'll compose the background rather than the character, or it's just things like that. And for me, what it allows me to do what my hope is that it allows the spectator to construct the rest of the frame. Like if I'm cutting someone's head off, they still know the person has a head, but it allows them to construct the rest of the head. And usually they have to draw upon their own experiences as a human being to construct that head. So they'll see in that a theme or a moment or something else that they've experienced then be presented on the screen. So there's almost like a realism to it. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Um, I want to go to Black Klansman now. And then we'll get to these questions. And obviously, Black Klansman. What was something that was so amazing about it was that what was happening in the narrative, there was a very obvious parallel to what's happening in the world today. Were there some discussions you and Spike Lee were having about how to depict that parallel with anything visually?
No, it's Black Klansman was pretty scary for me because Spike didn't really articulate much. In fact, I went into his office maybe like a week before the shoot, and he was a little bit upset about something. It didn't have anything to do with me. I think it was a budget thing. And then he opens up the script, and he starts flipping the pages, and he's like, crane shot, crane shot, crane, and we like went through the script in an hour and had the whole movie shot listed with just like random stuff. And I remember leaving it being like, I have no idea what we're doing. And, I was panicking. So then but we had set up the shoot in a really cool way where Mike Ellis, the first AD, I made a request to shoot the stunts, the really difficult stuff at the very beginning of the shoot, and Mike Ellis and Spike liked the idea. They had kind of had it a little peppered out a little bit more at the beginning, like we'd shoot some soft scenes and then we'd do a heavy scene, but I was like, let's just do all the hard shit right up front. And what we did is we hyper focused on that first week of production on the last week of prep. So then we went into the shoot and we kind of had this like monumental task, but a lot of it like energy, and I'd done schematics and maps and really figured it all out because it was technical shit with stunts and whatnot.
Yeah.
And then when we started getting into all the other storytelling, we just improvised. And Spike would usually show up like an hour early, so earlier than the crew, so he would kind of have an idea of what he wanted to do. And then he would throw those ideas at me, and then I would bounce back, and then we'd block it. Um, so we kind of found like a really good workflow. As far as the thing that I enjoy about that film is that um, Spike and I kind of set out to make this like buddy comedy movie. Not really a buddy comedy, but like, there's absurd things in that
Right.
film,
Yeah.
you know, and it's not totally realistic, even though it's like a true story, but it has like these very cliche, you know, almost like TV kind of storytelling beats in it. But
Right.
what that does is it completely disarms you for the ending.
Yeah.
And I remember when Spike came up with those ideas, because I wasn't, you know, the double dolly shot at the end, like all that stuff we hadn't figured out. And I was going to Colorado to shoot some B-roll and some like establishing stuff and a drone shot. And he's like, I want it in the movie where the camera flies out the window and it flies into a cross, at a KKK rally. I was like, okay, cool, cool. So we had to shoot like a plate of the cross and all that stuff. And then the
Yeah.
next week we were scouting, and he had like a whole different idea. He's like, it's not gonna be a KKK rally of that period. It's gonna be a KKK rally of today. And I was like, okay, okay, okay. And then the next week it was like a whole different idea. And sure enough, um, Barry, his editor, was cutting together with the archival footage that he had, the ending.
Yeah.
And I think we got that cut like after the first week of shooting or something. I can't remember. He was working on it. And then I finally kind of understood where it was going. But I don't know, like Spike was just throwing out ideas, and that whole thing kind of, it wasn't in the script. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like the way the script was the movie without that ending, which was kind of like a TV
Yeah.
movie. But I know how Spike's mind works. Like his aesthetic and the reason why he's an auteur is because he's all about what he's saying with the movie, and he says it really loud, and he smacks you in the face with it. And most filmmakers, especially the ones that I've come up with, we're kind of anti that. But if there's anybody in cinematic history that can do that, it's Spike. He's basically
Right.
made his aesthetic. And if anyone tries to do it, you're just kind of copying Spike now. And his themes are racism, and he's got that covered. Um, so it was really cool to see how that kind of came together, because I wasn't seeing it when we were shooting it. That was
Yeah.
kind of the post production thing. Um, but yeah, I'm so grateful that it worked like that, because I remember being in the DI with Tom, and man, I was like shedding tears every time that scene came up. I was like, "Stop it, Tom! Stop playing!" You know, crying. It
So,
was
so
really hard
on
to
a project
watch.
like that, when you don't have, like you said in the beginning, there was not a lot of input from him. Like when you have two things tonally that you're working with, something that is really dark and deep and true, but also not and comic. Um, what's your starting point, and how do you move forward creatively and visually? How do you set the palette and everything?
You're asking, well, sorry, can you ask the question one more time? I think I have the answer, but maybe.
Yeah, I'm just asking about tonally when you're working with two different, you're working with like a comic tone and also something that's dark and real. How do you kind of portray that visually when there's not a lot of direction from Spike
Well,
specifically?
one essential theme that I have in my mind in terms of like a rule that I have for myself is I always kind of divide everything into uh, either raw or romantic. And for me, my aesthetic is I'm always trying to be right between the two, where it's like reverberating, where you can't, it feels real, but it's also kind of beautiful and sensorial. It's kind of like this middle zone. And the reason I go there is because I don't want the spectator to have like an immediate association with one or the other, because then they're ahead of the film. Like
Yeah.
if you go too romantic, it's like they already seen this movie in a way. Do you
Yeah.
know what I mean? So with Black Klansman, even I'm kind of responding on those levels too. Like I'm reading absurd things in the film, in the script, but I'm trying to like bring it back the other direction. So it's not like as romantic. It's a little bit more raw, you know. That absurdity is a little bit more raw. But then I'm kind of always swinging between those two lines, and sometimes I hit it and nail it, but other times I don't. But it's okay because it's like I don't have total control over everything. You know, I have to surrender at some point to what the movie's going to be and what the director's doing and what the actors are doing. Um, and I think that that kind of a approach also limits my expectations as well, because I feel like it gets really, really tough in this industry when you have like um, when you overthink everything and you really try to be so precise, and then you never those expectations are never really fulfilled, and you can become deflated, and you can feel like it can kind of bring down your enthusiasm. And for me, the enthusiasm is everything. Once that is initiated, once you have that spark, you need to fuel it. You need to like take shovelfuls of coal and just start throwing it in there and keep that fire going.
Yeah.
Um, so that's a difficult question for me to answer. You know, like a lot of it comes down in terms of ideas. It's just like collaboration with a production designer, like sharing photography books. And I was looking at a lot of William Eccleston at the time, because he'd gone into like some of these Confederate areas with his camera. But those were like those weren't necessarily like aesthetic choices on my end, maybe on the production designer's end, because he has to fulfill like a contract to realism or the time period. And
Yeah.
I don't really have that contract. I can be free. In fact, the more I play against it, the more it's defying expectations. So then it becomes a little bit more interesting or compelling or repulsive. It provocates,
Yeah.
I think, is the actual thing that it should do. Rather than creating a consensus, it's kind of like does the opposite.
Yeah. Totally. So this is going to end in like 2 minutes on us. So, guys, everyone who submitted these questions, just you're gonna have to resubmit them. And Chase, if you got a little more time, we can just end
Yeah,
this and
definitely.
start a new one.
Cool.
All right, guys, we'll be back. For now, I do want to start with River because that is actually the first thing of yours that I've ever seen. I was in film school a few years ago at UCLA. I remember seeing it back then, and I was just completely moved by it. And since then, I've been in touch with your work, and there's just this like delicate, personal, immersive, and sensory approach that you have with all your work that is just really, really amazing. So I'd love to hear from you about what the process was with River was like with getting started and having conversations with Miles about it.
Um, yeah, Miles, we were kind of together in LA. I was shooting a commercial for the company that he's with, Smuggler. Um, and he was in LA, and he reached out to me and sent me the track. And Miles and I had worked together about 2 years prior. And uh, we hadn't worked together since. So when he reached out, it was kind of cool just to hear from him again. And we're both from the same area in Canada, Vancouver.
Okay.
And yeah, there was a lot of like difficulty with the shoot because I was on another production, so I couldn't scout. And Miles and his production designer Jade had gone around and scouted, and kind of in Long Beach area, and then we knew we were going to travel to Baltimore to shoot kind of the non-performance stuff. So I was kind of just like, improvising a lot. When I got out there to shoot in Long Beach, I think we'd wrapped the night before or the day before, and Miles's shoot was a night shoot, so I was pretty tired already, and I took some of the same crew with me from the job, like
Yeah.
my focus puller Jimmy Ward, and we were shooting on film on like a completely different package, and yeah, we just kind of blocked the seeds out and did it that way, did it like a really traditional way, even though I was pretty unprepared. I feel like when you kind of follow the formula of block, light, rehearse, and tweak, shoot, you can be actually really, really spontaneous. Because essentially what you're requesting from the director is for them to show you the scene and the
Right.
actors to show you the scene, and then you can respond to it, you know?
Yeah.
Whereas typically, sometimes when you get on a production, you're really obsessed with the shot list, and you don't block it. You just set up the first shot of the shot list, and then you start shooting the blocking, and you don't really get that chance to really understand what the emotion is or the themes are, or,
Right.
understand the space and explore the different possibilities in which it could be. So thankfully on River, I remember the performance stuff, just kind of walking into this hotel room, and we started shuffling a lot of the furniture around, and Miles had talked about doing like a long Steadicam shot from a corridor. So I had Dana Morris, my Steadicam operator, come out. He lives in Long Beach, so it was really convenient for him, and he came out and did a handful of shots for us, and then I took over and I started doing like handheld stuff near the end. And then we went to Baltimore, and that was like a whole different other story. Like, I've shot there in the past, and it's a really, really interesting place. Really, um, it's there's a lot of suffering going on there, and there's some really intimate stories. And I remember that there was one moment on set where I was trying to get Miles to adopt this technique that I seen Khalil Joseph do a lot, probably pretty much entirely, where he doesn't really set up a scene. He just kind of like, um, well, he sets up a scene like it's an event, and you shoot it like a documentary. But I kind of shoot it like a photojournalist rather than a documentarian.
Right.
And so he had cast all these real uh, activists who, um, uh, I guess it was a variety of different family members who had experienced some injustice from the police force there, and a young man's life was taken by a cop when he was unarmed. And we got those people to come in and kind of do their protest on a street corner, and we did it in this. It was actually a pretty dangerous area. It was probably one of the most drug trafficked neighborhoods in America. And we set up the scene there, and we shot it. And then afterwards, we were supposed to shoot in this alleyway, kind of like a wide shot of mother and son kind of walking down a corridor. And this guy comes out on his porch, just like I see a silhouette, and he's like, "Get the fuck out of here." And I was like, "Oh God, okay, we don't have permission to be here, even though our scout said we did." And I start walking back, and I'm like, "Let's just shoot right next to the base camp." And it was really beautiful out. There's kind of like a mist along the ground, and I was talking to the Steadicam operator, and about like 50 feet behind me, a gunshot goes off, and the Steadicam guy starts running, and uh, I just kind of took the first right I could, like around the corner, and I roll up on the location manager, and I'm like, "Dude, this is not safe. Like, we should leave right now."
Yeah.
And the producer
Wow.
comes over, and he's like, "I don't know. We should get out of here.